Speaking for business class specifically, because that's mainly what I search for, anything under $2,500 to Europe, especially from the West Coast, is a very good deal. Anything 2 grand or under is like when you should buy 100%, especially if it's peak. If you're seeing, $1,700 round trip Vegas to Paris in July, that's an amazing deal and you should book it. Asia is a little bit more expensive. To and from the Caribbean, Mexico, it's fairly easy to find under $1,000. A great deal is under 750, which we do see fairly often. Same with South America. I would say anything under two round trip, coast to coast, specifically with lie flat seats. So we're talking usually Boston to Seattle, JFK, LAX. Anything under 1,000 round trip is really good.
Hey there, points people. You just heard a clip from Ashley Peterson from Ashley Gets Around and Travel More. Ashley is the founder of Ashley Gets Around, an email subscription list for cheap business class flight deals. She's also the founder of the Travel More Points and Miles conference. Ashley has been to more than 100 countries on all 7 continents, and she is a pro at finding cheap cash fares in lay flat seats. In this episode, expect to hear about myths about how to find great cash deals in business and first class that don't actually work, what counts as a good deal anymore, next level techniques for finding flight deals with Google Flights, and so much more. And if you are in the market for a new card to earn points so that you can travel like Ashley, check out geobreezetravel.com/cards. And if you're not sure what card is right for you, I offer free credit card consultations at geobreezetravel.com/consultations. And if you're looking for even more strategies for how to maximize your points, sign up for our free live training by going to geobreezetravel.com/webinar. I only do these types of free trainings every few months, and we don't record them. We go through tips and tricks that I don't post anywhere else, so if you miss this free training, you miss out. Again, you can register at geobreezetravel.com/webinar, and I hope to see you there. And now, on with the show. Welcome to the GeoBreeze Travel Podcast, a show for anyone wanting to level up their travel hacking lifestyle. I'm your host, Julia Menez. I'm a travel hacker, coach, speaker, Filipino-American ENTJ who loves solid travel gear and using shortcuts on spreadsheets. On this show, I'm on a mission to bring you travel hackers from all walks of life to help you level up your travel hacking game. We dive into credit cards, miles, points, strategy, mindset, and the secrets behind how to travel the world for next to no cost. So, let's get hacking. Hello, Ashley. Welcome back to the GeoBreeze Travel Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me back. I'm super excited.
I'm very excited to have you here. Last time we talked about American Airlines and how to get amazing flight deals with them and how to get status, but today we are doing a different topic. We are talking about how to find good cash deals for anybody who somehow made it to this podcast and they're like, I don't want to deal with points at all. I just want discounted flights. We're going to talk about all the ways to do that. So let's start with, how do you not do that? What's the wrong way to go about finding flight deals?
So I would say that the myths tend to be the clickbaity stuff that you see on Instagram, Facebook that are like, buy on a Tuesday, use an incognito window. And the truth is, it's a little bit more convoluted of finding flights. Tuesday, I'm not even sure where the Tuesday buying flights on Tuesdays even came from, honestly, but everything is based on fare codes. And so revenue management at airlines is super complicated and it changes all the time. So you just look on Tuesdays, like you're probably not going to find the cheapest deal.
I think once upon a time they used to drop inventory on Tuesdays, and that once upon a time was probably like 30 years ago.
The incognito window one's really interesting to me because people are like so gung ho on it being true. And I'm like, okay, but like I just flew to Europe for $700 in business class and didn't use an incognito window to find the flight. A lot of times they'll look for a flight once and then they'll go back and look again and they're like, oh, it went up because I didn't use an incognito window or the airlines are spying on me. But in actuality, it's all because of fare codes. So it's likely that there was maybe 1 or 2 seats left in your flight at whatever price you saw. Once those get sold, you move up to the higher price. It's all about supply demand. And revenue management's pretty complicated, so I won't go like too far deep into that. But typically, the reason you see those $10, $15 changes on flights tends to be because it sold out in the fare class that you were looking at, and not because the airlines are spying on you. Because the airlines all use like really archaic like systems, as we've seen, because they'll just one thing goes wrong and then flights can't take off. So they're definitely not sitting around being like, oh, Julia in Vegas is looking at this Delta flight 3 times. We're going to jack up the rates. Like that's not really what happens. But it won't hurt you if you want to use an incognito window. It's just not going to help you get cheap flights.
When somebody has a seemingly confirming experience where they look up a deal on regular Google and then they look up the same thing on incognito and suddenly it got cheaper, what probably actually happened there?
It's likely a fare code issue. It's typically not because of the incognito window, or if they look on Google Flights, there might be like a dollar different on Expedia. Sometimes Expedia is cheaper than if you book directly with the airline for a variety of reasons. Usually it's because they're buying bulk fares, but usually it's pretty consistent across the board. And flights just change within 5 minutes of each other. I mean, that's sometimes how sales work. I could look up a flight at noon and be like, okay, well, it's still showing JFK to Paris on the dates at $2,800. And then randomly there's a sale 4 hours later and that flight drops down to 2 grand. I could be like, oh, it's because I used an incognito window, but really it would be the same price in both windows.
For people who aren't familiar with fare codes, what's like a good fare code versus the fare code to avoid? How do you know what's a good code?
So I don't even know the fare codes that I book really. It's just more of the fare buckets, I guess is a better term to say. So basically, like let's just say American Airlines are flying Charlotte to Cancun, and so much of the plane will be this price, so much of the plane will be another price. And even when you look at business class, maybe the first 2 seats, they've decided they're selling at $300. After those 2 seats, it goes up to 350. So it's all about fare buckets. But these also change because of if the flights, and we saw this with COVID, where I can't tell you how many cheap business class flights I bought in 2021 because they just were not filling. And so they were like knocking down the price to try to fill those seats. And so it's really very convoluted of what is going to cost because you don't really know. It's all based on supply and demand, pretty much.
Another one of those myths is if you buy flights at a certain time before you want to fly 6 weeks in advance or 8 weeks in advance, there's like a sweet spot of pricing and you just need to figure out the right spot in the camel hump of the pricing graph. What is that?
So I would say that it's not that one's not fully not true because in general, the earlier you buy for peak, so we're talking Thanksgiving week is the most expensive time to fly. As soon as you see a good deal, you want to buy that far in advance because you're likely going to get a better deal further in advance than you are the week of Thanksgiving, for example. That's just, again, supply and demand. The same with summer travel. You probably want to be looking for summer travel January, February. You tend to book it further out. In the US, I've noticed that typically 3 weeks, once you get into 3 weeks, the price sometimes goes up. And then day of pricing usually increases, but sometimes can drop. And again, if the flight's empty, and that's sometimes why you'll see maybe the 7 a.m. flight on American is showing $250, but then the 2 p.m. flight is showing $1,200. And it's likely that there's only 1 or 2 seats left on the afternoon flight, but the early morning flight maybe is only halfway full. And so it can really, for the same flight, can be a huge amount of difference, which is why status is great because I can book the really cheap flight and then just do same day flight change and get on the more expensive one. But yeah, in general, I would say it doesn't really matter for peak travel. If you're traveling summer, Thanksgiving, Christmas, the earlier the better. And you really can't predict when flights go on sale. And that for those, I would just book it when you see it. So I would just be looking, and if you see a sale and you're like, "Oh, wow, there's a sale on flights to Cancun and I really want to go to Cancun for spring break," book it when you see it on sale. Like don't wait because the prices can change so frequently.
Yeah, the Tuesday thing is a complete myth, but I think it's pretty true that the worst day to book a flight deal is the day you actually need to find a flight deal. Like if you desperately need something to be a mistake fare, the universe will just laugh at you at that point, and you're
Yeah,
not gonna
yeah. It even for me, I'm like, "Oh, okay, I really need this to work on Friday," and it'll be the one day that it doesn't work. It won't work on that certain Friday. But yeah, I mean, I think it goes into just being, as flexible as you can and giving yourself as much time as you can to find a deal. But a lot of times I've just noticed people will look once and they'll be like, "Well, flights from Chicago to Cancun are always $800." And it's like, "No, flights really, really change frequently, and you can't really predict how much they're going to be at one time." So I urge people not to look once and book immediately because you may get a good deal, but you likely don't have enough information about where the average price is for that ticket.
How long does it usually take a beginner to find like a deal that's good? And I guess we can also back up and say, what is a good deal whenever someone's like, hey, Ashley, is this a good price? And they're just sending you screenshots of like stuff all the time. What's a good rule of thumb for this is a good deal?
So, speaking for business class specifically, because that's mainly what I search for, anything under $2,500 to Europe, especially from the West Coast, is a very good deal. Anything 2 grand or under is like when you should buy 100%, especially if it's peak. If you're seeing, $1,700 round trip Vegas to Paris in July, that's an amazing deal and you should book it. Asia is a little bit more expensive. To and from the Caribbean, Mexico, it's fairly easy to find under $1,000. A great deal is under 750, which we do see fairly often. Same with South America. I would say anything under two round trip, coast to coast, specifically with lie flat seats. So we're talking usually Boston to Seattle, JFK, LAX. Anything under 1,000 round trip is really good.
Yeah, these prices that you were quoting, this is for round trip. So like
Round trip, yes.
under 2,000 round trip for business class to Europe. So let's say that somebody wanted to just splurge one of the ways where they're like, I can do economy one way and business class the other way. Does that mean under $1,000 one way is the metric we should go with, or does that math not exactly divide by two?
That math doesn't exactly divide by 2. I mean, it would depend. I did that actually when I went to Argentina. I booked literally it pretty much 3 days in advance because I decided to go to Antarctica last minute and could not find a business class under 5 grand round trip. I was like pulling my teeth out. And so I had to do one way premium economy and one way regular economy. And it actually was only 50 more bucks for me to add the one way in economy, or sorry, in premium economy, and then the other leg in economy. It really depends. And it goes back to with Qatar, especially, I've done this where one way usually would cost about $1,500 different. So if you look at the round trip economy price, and let's say that was $1,200 for somewhere in the Middle East for economy, usually for another 1,000 to 1,500, you can usually upgrade that one leg, but it's not a hard and fast rule. In general, if you're planning on using points one way and cash for the other, for Europe, your best bet is to using points going to Europe and then using cash going to the US from Europe. It tends to be cheaper to originate in Europe flying to the US. Typically, any flight from the US is going to be more expensive than flights to the US for a multitude of reasons, but that in general is true. So typically I tell people, like, if you're using points for one way, get the flight out with points and home with cash. That usually is cheaper.
You mentioned upgrading in there. I know a lot of people are
Yes.
like, well, what if I just buy the economy flight now and then try to upgrade if it goes on sale? What are the logistics of doing that?
So it really varies. It's so funny because I got a woman email me this today and I was like, how can I answer your question in less than like an ebook? Because it's so complicated. So it really depends on the airlines. Most airlines have the availability to upgrade if there's room, and it'll vary in cost. So I've been on American Airlines and seen it for $400 for an upgrade one way to business class, and I've seen Delta for the same. Sometimes it'll be $1,000. It really just depends. Some airlines allow you to bid on it. So I think Latam lets you bid on it. I bid on one recently and didn't get it. I'm trying to think what airline it was. I'm like blanking which airline it was. But there are a lot of airlines that'll let you bid. I know with Emirates you can use points to upgrade at the counter. What I will say is if you're traveling in peak, so summer to Europe, Thanksgiving, Christmas, those business class cabins are pretty full. So if you really want business, you should buy it when you're booking your ticket and not wait to upgrade. You can also upgrade with miles. So, like, even with American, you can usually, I think it's 25,000 points to move to business to Europe. But for that, usually you can find one way for 50,000. So it's going to depend on the cost of your economy ticket if it's worth it. But it really does vary.
Yeah, it's so dependent on the airline and their policies as well of like if you're allowed to upgrade later or right at the beginning. I usually tell people like what are you okay with as your worst case scenario? If that bid doesn't go through and no upgrades are available later, are you okay flying to Asia in economy? Because if you're like I physically cannot, then don't book the economy ticket with hopes of upgrading later.
Because as soon as you're like, oh, I can't handle economy, this upgrade has to go through, the universe will be like, ha ha ha, enjoy row 52. But also, I think it's really dependent on availability, and you just really can't predict what the availability looks like. And the same with the cost of how much it is. I know for Qatar, for example, if you get an email upgrade and you're like on the fence, 100% book it through the email upgrade because 5 out of 5 times I've tried to upgrade in Doha, it's been way more expensive once I've gotten to Doha and gone to the upgrade counter than it was in the email. So Charles send you email upgrades. But yeah, it really just depends on the airline, and you should try to book the cabin that if you're fine in premium economy, do that. And that's kind of for me, like if I had to fly back in premium economy, I'm okay. I don't want to be in regular economy. So I probably am not the person that's going to roll the dice on the upgrade. Also, what a lot of people don't realize is some basic economy or cheaper fares aren't even eligible on some airlines to upgrade. And a lot of times they'll look at the upgrade offers and be like, okay, Julia paid $1,000 for this flight. Ashley paid 1,500. Their bids are the same. They're going to give me the upgrade because I paid more for that ticket. And so that's the other thing is you have to be cognizant of the rules of, and they're always dumb. It'll be like, oh, well, you booked a fare class X, which most people wouldn't know what fare code they're even booking. And you might not even be eligible for that upgrade. So I would read the fine print of any airline you're booking because they all have different rules of who can upgrade with what and how much money.
When somebody's looking for cheap cash fares, whether in business class or economy, and they're like, all right, I need to get from Arkansas to the Maldives. I searched for it. Nothing's good. This doesn't work. Like, what do you tell those people?
People are going to hate this answer, and I get it because I live in a small regional airport as well, so I have to do this for myself. Even I just flew back from London and had to fly into Charlotte and drive home from Asheville because you couldn't find upgrade availability out of Asheville, but I could in Charlotte. So I would book a positioning flight, and so I would look for Arkansas is a little bit closer to the East Coast, I would say, than it is LA, but I would look at the airports you're willing to fly to. So New York tends to be the cheapest, pretty much. It's rare that we send a deal that doesn't include JFK as an airport. So I would recommend booking a separate flight, either with a cheap cash flight or points, position to New York, make it a 2-in-1. I would probably suggest flying in the day before just because things happen and you don't want to miss your big international flight. If you can't book the night before, I would book the very first flight out so that Little Rock, Arkansas, 5 a.m. flight to, Chicago or wherever it's going. So that way you have a full day and then just hang out in the lounge or do a day trip into the city. So you have enough time to make that second flight because you're going to likely save thousands just by booking 2 flights. And this is even when there's not like a big sale. It might be $5,500 and this happens to me too. It might be $5,500 to fly business out of Asheville, but if I look from DC or New York, it might be 2,800, and that's literally like half off just by booking 2 flights.
And that flight from Asheville to DC or New York is not going to cost you that difference of
No,
$2,000.
it
That's a couple
never
hundred.
is. It'll be like 200 bucks. And it is annoying. I definitely would, if you're flying in the night before, feel free to check a bag. If you're flying in same day, I would suggest doing carry on only because you are going to have to pick up your baggage, recheck it. And if your flight's late for whatever reason, you could kind of get screwed. But if you fly in the night before, that's generally, unless there's a blizzard or something, is pretty okay. That's typically what I do.
So the airports to search from are the major US airports, JFK, LAX, Dallas, all of those. Is there a good dates to search for? Not a date that you're searching on. So like the Tuesday thing is a myth, but how does one logistically go about being like, all right, what do I even type in to Google flights?
Yeah, so there's some airlines that will make you stay over a Saturday. So you'll have to like if you fly out Friday, a Friday or like for example, like if you did a Thursday to Saturday trip is maybe more expensive than a Thursday to Sunday trip for whatever reason. Typically Friday and Sundays are the most expensive days to fly. Midweek will be cheaper and then Saturday will be cheaper because people they're doing a long weekend, especially domestically they want to fly out Friday, they want to fly back Sunday. So those tend to be the most expensive. But yeah, I would say Wednesday to Wednesday is a good bet, Tuesday to Tuesday. If you can swing it, some people with work can't. Sometimes just leaving Thursday instead of Friday for Europe will save you a couple $100, but it really does just vary. But you can search on Google for the next 6 months. So you can say, oh, I want to fly some week in September, and it will populate the cheapest dates for you.
Can you pull up Google Flights and kind of show us
Yes.
what you're talking about? Because I think that for everybody who's listening to this on audio only, I highly recommend checking out the YouTube channel. But I think if we just get a visual of click this on Google Flights, this is how you find cheap cash deals. This is going to be pretty helpful for people.
Yes. Okay. So this is Google Flights. My I'm on this website. I'm surprised they haven't shut me down for like how much I'm on here searching. But if we're searching business, let's just do. If we're talking Little Rock, let's just see. Wait, I can't spell Little Rock. Would be helpful. Let's just see to Paris, just to see a comparison. So if you leave the dates blank, it will kind of well, this one you'll need to do. So it's looking like it's telling us because it's green, $6,400 is a good fare. Let's see if we can find it a little. Okay, so then October's 3 grand. So let's just click this. That's actually a very good fare for Little Rock. $3,100 is not horrible actually, but the same with Asheville. It'll be you know 3 grand, way more expensive. If we look for a bigger airport, so we don't want this though because that's not lie flat. But even so, this is going to be the worst example ever because it's
How
not
do
going to.
you know if something is lay flat? Because so Iceland Air is showing up as like it's sub $2,000. How do you know?
Yes. So if you click here, it will say recliner seat, which is not what we want for a long flight. What you're wanting instead is where it says lie flat seat. And it'll tell you right here in Google. So this is probably not even a good example because it's saying it's only $600 more dollars to fly from Little Rock. But in general, especially with Asia, it's going to be a big difference. One thing you can do that a lot of people don't realize is you can search for entire regions. So if you're like, I want to go to Paris, but I just want to find the cheapest flight I can, you can just do an entire region and it will pull up this map and you can kind of see this is specific dates, but you can actually even do flexible dates. So let's just say, and you can do it all, which is the next 6 months. You could do just October. Let's just say you have time off in November, but you don't care maybe what day. It'll show you the cheapest flights to pretty much anywhere in Europe. And you can zoom in and get a feel for the cost. Like, for example, if you're trying to go to Venice, well, you could actually just fly to Milan for a grand cheaper and then take the train for like 80 bucks to Venice. So you can see what is cheaper and what isn't. I mean, the same with some of these, like Marseille is much more expensive than Paris, that sort of thing. And you can do it from multiple airports. So let's just say you're willing to fly out of Washington, DC, Chicago, Miami, X, it'll show you the cheapest flights.
I saw that it popped up a thing that said maximum number of airport searches where you can only do up to 5. So you can't
Yes,
just be like, I'll go from anywhere in the US to Paris. It doesn't work like that. It has to be from a few airports to broad search.
correct. It works really well. So for me, being based in Asheville, there That is not it. That is not my airport code. Greenville is very close to me. So is Charlotte. And then so is maybe Atlanta. Maybe I'm willing to drive to Atlanta. So you could, if you're maybe Raleigh, Durham, Raleigh tends to have cheap flights. I could be like, okay, I'm willing to drive to these airports and fly out. And maybe you see that, oh, wow, if I fly to Greenville, it saves me $800. And you can do that for any region. So we can do Middle East, and it'll pop up everywhere in the Middle East for November dates. And it will only do for flexible dates, it will only do the next 6 months. If I think flexible goes to January, but we could actually go into next spring if you can do specific dates. So let's say you're trying to do a spring break trip to the Middle East, it will populate the cheapest flights of where to fly into. Europe's a little easier because it's easy to get from Paris to London. If you can't, the Middle East is harder, you'd still have to take another flight. And the same with, yeah, so it'll tell you, and it sometimes takes a second, but it'll show you like the difference. And sometimes there's not much difference. Like sometimes Madrid and Barcelona would be the same, but here it's like much more expensive to fly in Madrid than it would be Barcelona. So you can see that sort of thing. And actually, you can zoom out and it'll just bring up a map and you can literally just see, okay, if I want to travel the 12th, the 19th from these airports, here's how much it is to Tokyo. Here's how much it is to Bangkok. And so these are smaller airports. So for that, honestly, Asia is always going to be cheaper from these airports than it is Asheville. And yeah, Tokyo drops 2 grand just by moving to a different airport. And it's fun. I mean, I get lost on here for hours, just like playing around with it. If you want to go to Australia, Africa, the map moves with you and it's pretty accurate with the pricing. And so then if you're, just say we want to take this London flight, this is Iceland Air, so we don't want to use Iceland Air. So typically you can just do by alliances, or you can take, if it's a specific destination, you can get rid of specific airlines. So let's just say we want to fly to London, but we don't want to fly Iceland Air because they don't have life flight seats. You can take it out of there.
Are there other airlines other than Iceland Air that you recommend specifically avoiding because they don't have lay flat seats?
Yes, if it's on here. Azor Airlines is recliner seats too. So you don't want those. And this is specifically for Europe. I will say for the Caribbean, JetBlue tends to be the only airline that flies lie flat to the Caribbean, with the exception of a couple. There's couple fifth freedom flights out of Miami that will have lie flat seats. So the Caribbean and Central America and then northern South America tends to not be lie flat. But then there's airlines like Copa who fly to Panama from several cities in the US that are have lie flat seats. And it will tell you right in Google Flights, like this is lie flat, something else isn't. So for example, New York to Paris, we're going to ignore this $1,900 flight, but it will show you even a graph of the average prices and they change. So this is pretty typical. So it'll tell you if the flight's in green, it's a great time to buy. I think London for those dates maybe was green. Let me just see if we can find, yeah. So this'll, it tells you that it's cheaper. So you kind of know when it's like cheap versus really expensive, but it will only work if it's one destination. So as soon as I add like LAX, if I am searching for multiple airports, it won't show up. But it will tell you literally right here what the good deal is, except you do have to take, if you want lie flat, take Iceland Air out of it. So this one's a good deal because it's 3 grand round trip, lie flat, both ways, both flights. And it'll
From
even
JFK
tell you,
over to Thailand.
yeah, JFK to Bangkok. So it will tell you this is $1,400 cheaper than normal because the average is 42 to 5,200. And it'll give you all of this information, which is amazing. And you can also set alerts. So you can click right here to track prices and it'll email you. Unlike economy, you have to do specific dates. So I think with if you're searching economy instead of business, you can have a little bit more, yeah, so you could do any dates for economy. For business, it will only track prices for specific dates, so that's the difference. And I think with premium economy too, it has to be, yeah, it only economy is any dates. But if you wanna fly economy and you're like, "Okay, I just wanna go, I just wanna see the cheapest ticket I can get, I'm flexible on the dates," to just track prices, and if you're signed into your Google account, it will send you emails, which is amazing.
When people see those really deep discounted like mistake fares, like fly to Vietnam for $700 in business class round trip or something like that, what is happening? Like, why would that happen?
Oh, many things. So, sometimes it can be somebody made an error in putting those flights in the system, and it should be $7,000 and they left off a 0. Sometimes for flights that are, let's say, $1,400 round trip to Europe, could just be a deep sale that the airline is, we're gonna have a one-day sale and they'll allot so many seats. So it really honestly varies. And especially with the deep, deep mistake fares, they tend to be mistakes. But sometimes I think like maybe they're not mistakes. I don't really know. I just send them out and hope that they honor them, which normally they do, I would say. Most of the time they tend to honor them. There was one, I think it was last week. I didn't send it out because it ended up being dead by the time we found it, but it was first class to Australia. I think it was maybe $4,000 round trip. It was very cheap for Australia, maybe 3,800 first class. And Qantas acknowledged that it was a mistake and honored it, but put everybody in business class. So you could either get a full refund or you could take the flight for 3,800 in business, which I probably would still take because flights to Australia tend to be the most expensive in business class. It's rare to find something under $5,000. So even 3,800, while expensive, is still a good deal. And so they'll honor it. Sometimes they don't honor it, but you'll get a full refund if they don't honor it. And typically, I would say they cancel those flights pretty quickly if they're not going to honor it. It's typically within a week or two.
So, how often do people usually have to be searching for these? Like, I know we mentioned you can do alerts and everything, but what would you say if somebody's like getting frustrated where they're like, I never found like a good deal for my airport? Like, honestly, how long should somebody try before they are just like, I can't?
Yeah, honestly, like months. It can be like really frustrating, especially from smaller airports. I would say you're better off finding a range that you're comfortable with. Like for me, if I can find a flight for under 2 grand to Europe, I'm happy with it. I'm probably not gonna sit around trying to find a mistake fare for $400 because that's going to be much less likely to happen. And we look for flights 24 hours a day. I have an entire team looking for flights, and there are some days we don't find any. There are plenty of days we don't find anything worth sending. And then there's some days where we're like, oh my gosh, we had 2 mistake fares in one day. How crazy. And you can't predict them, which, I think is fun. And to me, it's like finding a needle in a haystack. I get super excited when there's a mistake fare, but it's, 10, 20 times a year. It's something I don't even think I've sent one in at least a month. So it really varies, especially for the mistake fares. So I think the better way of searching is saying, okay, how much are we comfortable spending? Okay, we're good with like economy. I'm happy with anything around 1100, and then searching, setting alerts until you get something that's 1100. But in like to be reasonable, like you're probably not going to find $500 mistake fares to Paris in July. You have to be realistic of how much. But if flights are showing really high, if the thing on Google Flights says, hey, these flights are abnormally high, then I would wait a week, go back in, and then search until they drop down.
With your team that's searching for these, do you split it by region or how do you make sure everybody's not just searching for the same things? Or you just have 5 people on staff who just all sent you the same thing and you're like, that was redundant effort, team.
Yeah, so it really depends because overnight we have usually 2 people working, and it's funny because we don't split them by region necessarily. Sometimes we do, but we also have some programs, a program we use that searches mostly Europe. But yeah, it's funny, it hasn't really happened that many times where people have found the same deals. Like people tend to search for different stuff. But yeah, we pretty much search Canada, US departure cities, And then sometimes we'll get crazy and I'll be like, all right, just search from these cities in Europe and see if we, but yeah, I have a whole like list of like, all right, if there's nothing here, go do this. If there's something, so it's pretty compared to when I first started the email list where it was literally just me in the middle of the night searching for flights, which now it's an entire team, which is funny. And I still search too because I don't sleep. So sometimes if you get an email at 4 a.m., it's probably because like I was up searching for flights. And but yeah, it really varies with what we find and when we find it. And sometimes it honestly it is usually the middle of the night. Like it tends to be that these mistake fares happen at 5 a.m. for some reason. And so sometimes I'll be like, oh, I found the deal before anybody else just because I was awake at 4:30, not able to sleep, or because I was in Europe and I'm just in a different time zone than the East Coast. So it really varies.
Yeah, I guess a lot of people are probably wondering that too of do they have to stay up in the middle of the night? Is that when deals happen is 3 a.m. because they do a drop then and then nobody else has seen it. So you have a really good chance of booking this if most of the US is asleep. Is that a myth?
I think yes and no. Like I tend to think that like flights go on sale in the middle of the night, but usually by the time if they're just on a normal sale, you probably have a couple days to book it if it's a mistake fare. One of the ones I sent last year, I think it was right at a year ago, was a ton of US cities, like almost all of them, to London and Frankfurt with United. And that I found at like noon, the middle of the day. So it really just varies. Like that's why I suggest, it doesn't have to be my email list, but like these email lists, not just mine, other ones, like they're searching for deals 24 hours. You're better off just paying for one of the lists or joining a free list than searching yourself because most likely they're going to do a better job finding it than you are. I mean, you're definitely totally can search for flights if that's like what you're doing, but realistically, I think you're better off just shelling out a little bit of cash to have somebody do it for you.
Yeah, speaking of which, tell us a little bit about your email list for everybody who's not familiar with it and why is it just worth it to just be like, "Hey, I'm going to sleep. Ashley, since you don't sleep, you do this for me."
Yeah, exactly. So my email list is only premium cabin. So it's primarily business class, first class, and then a little bit of premium economy when it's super cheap. And I'm talking like $375 round trip premium economy to Europe, which is the deal we see like several times a year on SAS actually. And yeah, it's 229 a year, but heads up, there'll be like a Black Friday sale. If you want to save a little bit of money, you can join Black Friday. And yeah, we just send deals straight to your email. Inside the email is everything you need to know to book the flight. We tell you what airline alliance, we tell you the seat type. Most are 1-to-1, which means there's one seat at the window, two seats in the middle, and one seat at the other window, which means everybody in business class has direct aisle access. That's really unique to my email. Think I'm the only service that shows you the configuration. And then for JetBlue, some of their older flights are like two, two, and then alternating with rows of one. And so I'll tell you in there, hey, book the one seat if you're traveling solo. So then you have a throne seat and you're by yourself, but it includes links to Google Flights. We tell you the dates that it works for. We tell you the average savings, and that obviously varies. If you're flying to Europe, you might be saving $900 on a flight. If you're flying to the Caribbean, it might be like, hey, this flight's normally 1,000, it's on sale for 750, and you might save, you know, $300. It's usually at least 30% off. We don't, I'm not sending flights that are $100 off. And it's really rare that I send anything that's 3 grand. Typically we don't like sending anything that's like over 3,000. So for Europe, pretty much under 2 grand is what we send. But yeah, everything's in the email and then you just have to open it and be like, oh, I like this deal. This deal doesn't work for me. And then if it works for you, click it and book it. You book it directly through the airlines, what we recommend. So I don't make any commission if you book it or don't book it. I'm basically just a searching service. So we just find it and then send it to you. And then if you want to book it, you can book it.
How do people sign up for your email list?
They can go to ashleygetsaround.com and sign up there. And I do have a free list as well.
Tell us about Travel More. If somebody's, I want more of this content and to talk to people in person about how to do this, talk about Travel More.
Yeah, so Travel More is a conference that I started last year. Julia was a speaker last year. Julia's coming back as a speaker this year. And I just felt like I'd gone to a few Points and Miles meetups. They tended to be like very heavily men. There's one that I feel like everybody goes to, but you really need to learn like a secret language to go. And I felt even though I was kind of advanced that I didn't even understand some of the things people were talking about. And so I started travel more as a way to be like, okay, well, to understand points and miles is complicated. There's a lot to learn just to get like even a mid-level like understanding. And so we have two tracks at Travel More. We have advanced and beginner. So you can just come and learn all you need to know about points and miles. Each of our sessions are pretty specific. So like last year we had one that was completely about Marriott, one that was completely about Hyatt. This year we have one that's only about Hilton. So you'll learn tips and tricks about specific programs, specific cards. We have yours is I isn't yours I had a what is it again? It's like you don't need 20 cards.
Yeah.
And there's different viewpoints. So we definitely have people that are like, here's how you can sign up for 82 credit cards, and this is a strategy. And then you have Julia who's like, here's how to maximize these 5 cards. And so there's a really wide variety. And it's just a fun weekend. We have an opening party Friday night. We have game night Saturday night. It tends to be about 80%, 90% women. I think we have a little bit more men this year, but it's really just a fun weekend. And if you can't come in person, we do have digital tickets. You can watch all the sessions. And it's great because if you come as a beginner, you could do most of the beginner classes, but you'll still get the recordings to where when you're more advanced, you could watch those as well. Yeah, it's going to be fun. I'm excited.
How do people sign up for that?
They can go to travelmorecon.com. So Travel More Conference. I anticipate we're selling out, which is honestly insane for a second year conference. We already sold out of first class tickets, which was our kind of like VIP ticket, and we're already sold out of rooms at the host hotel. So we do have an alternate room block at a Hyatt around the corner. And I would say we have about 75 tickets left. So I think we're gonna sell out. So definitely if you want a ticket, get one soon.
Perfect. Well, thank you again, Ashley, so much for coming on to the show today and talking about how to find some great cheap cash deals with Google Flights. And I'm really excited to see you again at Travel More.
I know it's gonna be so fun. Thanks for having me.